Forget the surface headlines. Forget the quick takes, the manufactured outrage you see everywhere. We've got a mountain of raw, unfiltered source material today. Stuff detailing the explosive fallout from that recent major political assassination.
Yeah, and this is a really crucial deep dive. We're not just looking at the news reports. We're trying to analyze the actual cultural architecture of the response itself.
Exactly. We're aiming to cut through all that noise.
Right. To unpack some honestly terrifying rhetoric, these polarizing, almost mythic claims of martyrdom that popped up.
And the cultural warfare. It's complete
Absolutely.
consuming the digital sphere in real time.
And our goal for you, the listener, is pretty simple. It follows that philosophy we call Kaizen, that continuous process of improving understanding.
We want to synthesize these really intense currents.
So you leave this discussion knowing exactly how these incredibly charged events are being framed. Not by us, but by the participants themselves, the people in the thick of it.
And our sources today, they're quite a mix, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. It's astonishing, really. You've got this raw, superheated online commentary.
Yeah.
Official reports mixed in there. And then, almost jarringly, these completely disconnected, hard data fragments.
Like that baseball player profile.
Exactly. And just routine college announcements. Stuff that seems totally out of place at first glance.
So our mission here is to intensely synthesize these three main currents we're seeing.
Right. First, there's the acute political and, cultural violence, the reaction to it.
Then this almost desperate search for morality, forgiveness clashing with, vengeance.
And third, those cold underlying data points, the things that maybe anchor us back to some kind of reality amidst the chaos.
Okay, before we really jump into the analysis, we want to kind of set the stage. There's this moral tension we found just everywhere in the sources.
Yeah, it's unavoidable. The debate immediately fractured, didn't it, between this push for forgiveness
and this really visceral, gut-level demand for vengeance.
Right. So think about this as we go through the material. When you're confronted with something like profound political violence, where does your instinct lead? Is it towards grace, or is it retribution?
Hold that thought, because it really is the essential question our sources are just grappling with constantly. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the source material that details the immediate, explosive reaction to the Charlie Kirk assassination.
Yeah, and it's striking. This wasn't a moment for quiet reflection or, contemplative mourning.
Not at all.
It was an instantaneous digital event. It just immediately spiraled into a political and cultural weapon.
That's the core observation, I think.
Yeah.
The assassination triggered just a volcanic reaction across all the online threads we looked at.
And the initial emotional response, it was raw, it was human. People described feeling profoundly shook.
Yeah, focusing on the tragic fact, right, that the victim was a young father of two. That phrase came up a lot.
It did. But the sources show that this grief, it immediately became, strategically weaponized.
It shifted almost instantly
into political analysis and just widespread aggressive finger-pointing. The blame game started immediately.
And this is where the rhetoric just achieves, extreme velocity. The narrative of blame wasn't just instant, it was incredibly specific, targeted.
Yeah, the sources drew direct causal links right between the act of violence itself and what they perceive as years of systematic calls for political violence coming from figures on the left.
They weren't subtle about it.
Not at all. We're talking about rhetoric so extreme that it's being framed almost as a direct instruction manual. This led to that.
We saw users directly quoting figures like Hassan Piker, claiming they screamed daily for followers to, quote, kill them all.
That exact quote appeared multiple times.
Yeah.
The sources are just saturated with this belief that this sustained rhetoric created a permissive environment, an ideological license almost, for murder.
Let's dig into that specific claim a bit more, the radicalization aspect, because it's really central to how the source material justifies the cultural war that follows.
Right. One commenter laid out this whole psychological and institutional roadmap they believe led to the assassination.
Yeah, I remember that one. They argued the suspect was molded by a societal failure, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Things like they were sexually exploited, they were brainwashed by schools and big tech, they were drugged by our evil medical establishment.
That's a long list of grievances.
And then once they were stripped back to a naked core of blind rage, people like Piker literally scream at them every day to kill them all. Kill them.
End quote. Wow.
That's intense.
What's fascinating, or maybe disturbing, is the complete refusal in these comments to see this as, isolated madness.
Right. It's framed as intentional.
Explicitly, as the intended manufactured result of institutional failure, of media failure. It suggests the violence itself is proof that the whole ideological system is toxic.
That's terrifying because it transforms the assassination from a tragedy, a horrific event,
Into an argument about systemic moral decay. Okay, given the extremity of that quote we just read, the idea that this violence was basically engineered, we want to know what you think. Does this level of rhetoric, regardless of where it's coming from, does it shock you?
Yeah. If you're surprised by the sheer intensity of what people are claiming in these sources, just take a second right now and write extreme in the comments. Let us know.
Okay, so this incredibly high-intensity climate then immediately collides with something else, right? An entirely separate but equally defining cultural flashpoint in our sources.
Yes, the controversy surrounding Jimmy Kimmel. This event became like a litmus test for rhetorical hypocrisy, according to the comments.
The factual claim, at least as reported by the commenters, is that Kimmel, the late-night host, was removed from his show. Canceled, they'd say.
Right, for allegedly telling a falsehood related to the assassination or, the aftermath. The details were sometimes fuzzy, but that was the claim.
And the sources just seized on this immediately. They've used it as this massive cultural fault line, defining who gets a platform, who gets purged.
And what stands out, what the commenters came back to again and again, was the immediate eruption of this rhetoric of double standards.
Total hypocrisy in their view.
That's how they framed it. Commenters were just outraged by what they saw as the hypocrisy of people who had allegedly justified or maybe minimized the murder of a young father.
Now suddenly demanding absolute protection for a celebrity facing career consequences.
Exactly. The irony, according to these sources, was just too rich. Users repeatedly quoted the perceived leftist reaction. Things like demands for free speech for Jimmy Kimmel.
While at the same time declaring that canceling Jimmy Kimmel is an act of war.
Right, that inversion. Where losing a TV show is framed as a cultural crisis equal to, or even worse than, political murder. This was treated as definitive proof of the opposition's, intellectual bankruptcy.
It sounds like more than just the usual political sniping, though.
Oh, it is. One source described it as proof that lefties are just flailing because, in their view, the outrage scale is completely broken.
Your reaction doesn't match the event.
Precisely. The severity of their reaction to the cancellation just doesn't align with the severity of the original crime, the assassination. And that reinforces the critics' core argument that the opposition is fundamentally dishonest about their own values.
And this seems to deepen the narrative even further. It moves beyond just hypocrisy to suggest maybe a deeper moral flaw.
That's exactly where it goes. One highly cited commenter suggested the left is fundamentally and irredeemably dishonest.
Strong words.
Very. And that their underlying ideology allows all things being permissible in the name of victory. So, since, in the critics' view, this ideology permitted political violence,
then their sudden concern for Kimmel's platform protection is just seen as meaningless, strategically self-serving.
Utterly meaningless in their eyes. Our analysis shows that for many of these commenters, the perceived humiliation of a celebrity like Kimmel losing the status, the show, the millions it felt necessary.
Like a proportional response.
A proportional, symbolic victory against what they see as unchecked hate speech. An attempt to finally enforce consequences on those holding cultural power. It starkly contrasts the tragic physical loss of life with the satisfying political loss of status.
So it validates their belief, then, that the rules of Western civilization, things like free speech,
are just tools to their opponents. Tools to be abused until they gain power.
And then stomped on to keep power, as one source put it.
Exactly. The Kimmel incident became the necessary, visible stomping required, in their view, to reestablish some kind of moral boundary.
Okay, this is where things take a really interesting turn in the source material. A pivotal moment, I think.
Definitely. The conversation, maybe just overwhelmed by the extremity of the political fighting, it completely transitions, shifts into this deeply theological and moral framework.
And the victim, Charlie Kirk, is instantly elevated, becomes this figure of heroic, almost religious significance.
And the mechanism for that elevation was very direct, very unambiguous. It was driven by a major religious figure.
Right. Our sources immediately seized on public commentary from Cardinal Dolan.
Yes. Who compared Charlie Kirk to a modern-day St. Paul?
That's quite a comparison.
It's profound, isn't it? St. Paul, known as this tireless, fearless missionary and evangelist, spreading a message that was challenging, often dangerous.
So by making that comparison, Dolan wasn't just framing Kirk as a political commentator anymore.
Not at all. He reframed him as a fearless missionary, a passionate evangelist, and a true hero. Someone killed because he spoke, quote, what Jesus meant when he said, the truth will set you free.
And the sources confirm this had a huge impact.
Immense, apparently.
Yeah.
Dolan's endorsement, essentially granting this theological validation, reportedly convinced some observers, people who had maybe been undecided before.
Convinced them that Kirk was in fact a martyr.
Exactly. And this isn't just political spin anymore. It's a full spiritual reclassification. It elevates the entire conflict beyond just partisan politics. It becomes a moral war, a spiritual war, good versus evil, truth versus deception.
And this narrative seemed to resonate deeply. Why was that?
Well, according to the sources, it tapped into this deep, unmet spiritual and moral yearning in the American cultural landscape.
How so?
Commenters explicitly noted that some mainstream Protestant churches, they specifically named the United Methodist Church, the UMC, and the Presbyterian Church USA, the PCUSA,
Okay.
that they've alienated their core members by focusing too heavily on progressive, secular politics rather than the core gospel message.
They called it nice Christianity, didn't they?
That's the term used, the kind that avoids the difficult topics like hell and sin in favor of social comfort, social justice themes maybe.
And the failure of these institutions, the sources claim, pushed people back towards something else.
Towards a return to the older form of Christianity, one that does address absolute morality, spiritual warfare. The martyrdom of Kirk, then, fills this moral vacuum created by the perceived softness, the perceived political correctness of modern church leadership.
Wow. Okay. So this theological framing provides the essential context for the next really intense moral discussion we saw.
Yes. The debate over forgiveness versus vengeance. And this wasn't some abstract, hypothetical discussion. It was a crisis of conscience playing out right there in the comments section.
We saw this powerful juxtaposition, right? Two fundamentally different responses defining the moral stakes.
Absolutely. On one side, you have this profound, almost impossible sentiment of radical grace. Someone saying, that man, that young man, I forgive him.
Referring to the shooter.
Referring to the shooter. This quote is held up as the ideal of Christian virtue, recognizing the shooter maybe as a product of evil rather than the source of it.
But immediately countering that.
You find the raw, the visceral, the human desire for retribution. The quote, I'm more a burn the bastard kind of guy, was cited often.
And the commenter who said that was quite self-aware about it.
Very. They rightly noted that this strong desire for justice is precisely why they know they aren't a saint. Acknowledging that tension between human instinct and the spiritual mandate to forgive.
And the attempt to sort of reconcile these two opposing forces, that's maybe the most fascinating part.
I think so too. You see this moral imperative articulated by one source.
Yeah.
To not understand is to recognize how powerful love is, that it exists in the face of evil, and to believe that love can and will and does win over the evil of this world.
So suggesting forgiveness is the higher path, the difficult spiritual challenge needed to defeat the greater evil.
That's the implication. But
Yeah.
then you get this dark, pragmatic reconciliation, the comment that grounds the spiritual ideal in, well, earthly justice.
Which one was that?
One source offered this incredibly grim but candid perspective. I don't see any reason why you can't forgive him right before hanging him.
Wow, that is stark.
It's shocking, isn't it? But it crystallizes the tension. It acknowledges the spiritual need for grace, while simultaneously upholding the societal need for absolute final consequence. The soul's desire for grace versus society's need for retributive justice.
That quote really is a punch to the gut. It shows that for many people in these sources, morality isn't a choice between grace or justice.
But a recognition that both can, and maybe sometimes must, coexist.
Taking this moral analysis a step further, one source offered a powerful extrapolation, linking personal morality directly to public chaos.
Yeah, they suggested that people who reject core, stabilizing virtues, things like responsibility, decency, commitment, integrity, they inevitably end up with, quote, crappy lives.
Full of self-destruction and failure.
Exactly. And the implication is profound. The public violence, the assassination itself, is just the most visible, macroscopic reflection of a widespread personal and moral failure among individuals who've abandoned these foundational virtues.
Like a diagnosis of societal spiritual rot.
That's a good way to put it, a complete diagnosis.
Okay, this intense moral accounting leads us straight back to the discussion about the suspected assassin and the detailed narrative around how they supposedly became a killer.
Right. A discussion overwhelmingly framed by institutional failure and this idea of grooming.
The sources paint this terrifying profile of the individual, don't they? Linking the violence to what they see as systemic social decay, manipulation.
The claim is the individual was a victim of sexual exploitation, brainwashing by schools and big tech, being drugged by our evil medical establishment.
There's a whole trajectory, they argue.
Resulted in a person stripped down to a naked core of blind rage. Perfectly primed, they claim, for the political violence they eventually carried out.
It's just an overwhelming indictment of the very institutions meant to protect and educate us.
Absolutely. And this leads immediately into a discussion of competing conspiracy theories about the actual motive, which just highlights the complete collapse of trust in any official narrative.
What kind of theories were mentioned?
Well, what's particularly chilling is the mention of theories suggesting the Mossad or the deep state killed Kirk.
Why? What was the supposed reason?
Specifically because he had questioned Israel's stance on October 7th, which suggests this profound geopolitical distrust among some segments of the online audience.
But that wasn't the only theory, right?
No, not at all. This complex, frankly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory is immediately and fiercely contrasted by the more prevalent trans-war theory.
Which is?
That the killing was motivated by extreme gender ideology and anti-Christian rage.
And commenters pointed out the irony there.
They did. Kirk was a Christian who actively celebrated the Jewish Sabbath, which makes the Mossad theory difficult to reconcile with his known public life.
So this whole frenetic debate just shows people desperately seeking a coherent explanation.
A coherent, high-level, almost methodological explanation for such shocking violence. They need a simple story, it seems. Good versus evil, to make sense of the chaos.
And the critique of institutional failure extended to law enforcement, too.
Directly. Sources claim the FBI knows the locations they specifically called out, certain bookstores, and even the names of instructors, where terrorist team leaders are allegedly trained.
But they're failing to make arrests. That's the claim.
That's the claim. And it escalates into serious accusations that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, and the FBI are still infested with politically motivated actors.
Actors who are actively hindering investigations into domestic terror cells.
That's what the sources suggest. A complete collapse of law enforcement integrity when it comes to political violence, viewing the institutions not as protectors, but as active obstacles to justice.
Okay, we've just covered some incredibly extreme rhetoric, the search for spiritual martyrdom, claims of absolute institutional failure. This is heavy material.
It really is, and we recognize the effort it takes to process it all.
Remember, you, the listener, you're operating under that principle of Kaizen right now. You're seeking continuous, deeper understanding, even when it's uncomfortable.
So if you're processing this with us, let us know right now. Just write digging in the comments if you're ready to continue this comprehensive analysis. We appreciate you sticking with it.
We absolutely have to pivot now. We've been immersed in this abstract chaos, theological warfare, political warfare.
Yeah, it's been intense.
Now let's pivot completely to the sources that provide a different kind of anchor, a cold, tangible anchor, pure data, and the mundane, persistent reality of American community life.
This is the world that just continues, doesn't it? Regardless of the rhetorical inferno online.
Exactly. And this is a crucial section, I think, because it reveals this dual nature of reality presented in the source stack we looked at.
Let's start with that file on Hunter Nadeau.
Huh?
The data we actually have on this individual is purely structural, isn't it?
Completely. It's focused on recruitment metrics for a baseball player from Perfect Game USA. It's like the polar opposite of the emotion we've just been discussing.
It really is. And the detail here is stunning, mostly in its commitment to the future. It's exhaustive.
The available data categories, they read like this abstract language of measurable, quantifiable achievement.
Right. We see rankings for high school classes stretching all the way out to 2030.
2030, that's a kid who's probably, what, 12 years old now?
Something like that. Their potential is being charted, projected, analyzed years before they could even get a driver's license, let alone think about a draft pick.
And the focus is purely on long-term statistical improvement.
Purely. The sources list these highly technical formulas used to calculate player value. We're talking OPS,
On base plus slugging,
AVG,
batting average,
OBP,
on-base percentage,
and SLG, slugging percentage.
Let's just break that down quickly for anyone listening who doesn't speak fluent baseball analytics. These aren't just scores, right?
No, they're complex ratios. They define a player's ability to create offensive chances, essentially.
OPS, for instance. That's kind of the gold standard now for measuring a hitter's combined power and efficiency.
Exactly. It's a world where every single action is broken down into a measurable number, tracked meticulously over decades, potentially.
So what's the significance of including this file in the same source stack as an assassination and all that intense rhetoric?
Well, it represents the complete opposite of the chaos, doesn't it? Here, success is defined by slow, measurable, statistical, verifiable improvement, projected years into the future.
It's a world completely divorced from the sudden, emotional, unmeasurable volatility of political violence.
It's the certainty of data versus the uncertainty of rhetoric. The sources almost suggest a search for psychological comfort in these predictable metrics, something solid to hold on to.
And we see a similar kind of anchor in the academic world too, right? The quiet continuity of institutional education.
Yes. Our sources included announcements from Bunker Hill Community College, BHCC,
confirming its locations in Charlestown and Chelsea, Massachusetts, detailing its structure, its mission, its commitment to access and opportunity for local students, just normal institutional function.
And this is important. The source material explicitly confirms the announcement of the Fall 2024 Dean's List and Merit Lists, and the Spring 2025 Merit List.
Think about that cultural contrast for a second. While the online world is burning with accusations of institutional corruption and moral failure,
this engine of institutional education just quietly continues to operate, acknowledging student achievement through traditional merit-based means like it always has.
It's a reminder, isn't it, that there's this vast, unseen America out there. The students studying for finals, the parents dropping kids off at community college, the administrators focused on logistics.
Yeah, a world that continues its rhythm, maybe insulated from, or perhaps just simply ignoring, the online cultural warfare.
The Dean's List doesn't care about political polarization. It only cares about a student's GPA. That persistence is, in its own way, an act of stability, I suppose.
I think so. Finally, let's turn to the robust communal life detailed in some of the hobby threads, the things Americans turn to for connection, for mastery, for purpose, away from the political fray.
This is where we find people actively building connection, right? We saw extensive discussion of that annual TX MOM event.
A moment of the morons, yeah. In Corsicana.
The sources detail really intense planning for this gathering, emphasizing camaraderie, shared activities, shootings, cigars, bourbon.
And that very specific detail about wearing a Hawaiian shirt theme to honor the memory of someone called Jin SND.
It's evidence of these microcultures actively cultivating community, honoring their own heroes and rituals completely outside the mainstream political narrative.
And it's a deep dive into the psychological need for mastery and control, too. The sources get really specific about hobby details. Gun collecting and shooting is a huge focus.
Mentioning specific firearms, the Ruger Old Army, the Colt Peacemaker, technical aspects of complex AR-10 builds.
These are hobbies that demand precision, focus, a lot of technical knowledge.
And it wasn't just the external technical hobbies either. We saw domestic forms of mastery, too.
Like detailed car restoration, mentioning a 78 Old Cutlass Calais engine swap.
And a big focus on food preparation. Complicated butternut squash, pasta sauce recipes, planning for a German food fest, personal triumphs like sustained keto diet success.
Why do these details matter? Well, they aren't just random lists. They illustrate this psychological defense mechanism against chaos, perhaps. When the world feels out of control, when assassinations happen, when institutions seem to fail, people often retreat into hobbies where they can achieve absolute, measurable control.
Whether it's the tight grouping of shots from a rifle
or the perfect macros of a keto meal plan, it's something you can manage.
It provides a crucial relatability factor too, doesn't it? These detailed discussions about daily life, about hobbies, they highlight that while the political class might be fighting a moral war,
most people are just striving for connection, control, and mastery in their own specific fields. Whether that's aiming for accuracy with a PSA rifle or trying to get a better OPS score in their baseball league.
We even saw a mention of the popular wholesome fun of the Savannah Bananas baseball team.
Described as the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, suggesting a strong desire for family-friendly entertainment that offers simple, non-toxic joy amidst all the conflict. #outro. So we started this deep dive exploring how people process extreme political violence and the immediate, just ferocious cultural backlash that followed.
And we found the conversation didn't really linger on facts or mourning for long.
No, it immediately spiraled into this incredibly high-stakes debate over moral and theological claims.
The core question became, is the victim a martyr? Like a spiritual warrior?
And is the justified response forgiveness, or is it vengeance?
This entire reaction, it really shows that the cultural conflict has fundamentally escalated, hasn't it? It's not just about policy anymore.
Not at all. It's about the fundamental moral, even spiritual definition of the players involved. Who is good, who is evil.
And then, juxtaposed against all that theological chaos, we found those powerful cold anchors of reality.
That Hunter Nadeau file, demanding measurable performance decades into the future.
The continuous, quiet rhythm of institutional life at places like community colleges.
And the retreat into detailed hobbies that offer personal control and community connection when the wider world feels unstable.
Remember, you, the listener, you're demonstrating the Kaizen principle just by being here, by seeking this deep, comprehensive understanding in a really complex world.
Yeah, we really appreciate your commitment to seeking the complete nuanced picture, even when the source material is difficult, even disturbing sometimes.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought. It comes directly from the incredible sources we analyzed today.
We've seen the cultural conflict being framed in explicitly theological terms. Now, martyrdom, sin, righteous war.
So if one side defines itself as engaging in a spiritual war for absolute moral victory,
and the other side focuses almost exclusively on measurable, scientific, statistical metrics, like that baseball data.
yeah,
How long can their arguments even remain in the same realm? Can they even talk to each other using rational discourse?
one commenter chillingly called the current rhetoric the true moral equivalent of war.
Yeah.
We need to know what you think about this tension, this clash between spiritual warfare and statistical reality. Should political arguments always be treated as a form of zero-sum cultural warfare?
Let us know. Write Y for yes or N for no in the comments right now.
And make sure you like and share this deep dive immediately. Check out the Kaizen channel for more insightful analysis just like this.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.